Look at the trouble Flavio Bolsonaro is in. To avoid Flavio, the big bosses of the Centrão are absent. The União PP convention. So, my friend, the União Brazil and the Progressive Party convention is about to happen, and Flavio Bolsonaro is going to the convention. Then both party presidents said if Flavio goes, they won't, because people might think they support him, which they don't. Ciro Nogueira, who is the president of the PP, is upset with Flavio Bolsonaro because Flavio Bolsonaro didn't support Ciro Nogueira. When he was targeted by a federal police operation which found out he was receiving 300,000 reais a month in bribes from Daniel Alvarcaro, he wanted a show of support from Flavio Bolsonaro, but Flavio Bolsonaro didn't give it, so he got upset and won't support him, right? And the president of Republicanos, which is the party of the Universal Church runs Republicanos, Marcos Pereira is even a pastor, or a bishop, I don't know, he's from the church too, right? So, it's Edir Macedo who doesn't want to get on board with Flavio Bolsonaro. The president of Republicanos was also supposed to go out of solidarity, right? Because the presidents of allied parties usually go to each other's conventions and so on. And then he was also going to the convention of União Brazil and PP, but he already said, I'm not going anymore. I'm not going because Flavio will be there. So Flavio is radioactive, you know? If someone gets close, it already bothers them. It already causes trouble. So these people aren't going to the convention just to avoid running into Flavio Bolsonaro. And what's the practical result of this? Flavio will have 20% less time on television than Lula if he remains isolated. Flavio will have just over 4 minutes per day and Lula about 5 minutes. Why? Because Lula has a bigger coalition, right? There's PT, PSB, PDT, PSOL, PV, and PCdoB. I don't know if there's any other that I'm forgetting, but anyway, all the left-wing parties are with Lula, so together that gives a reasonable amount of TV time. Flavio is with PL, but who else? But no one else, right? So even though PL's caucus is big, it's the largest caucus in the National Congress. So he has a reasonable amount of TV time on his own, but it still doesn't give him as much time as Lula has now. Of course, if no one forms a coalition with Flavio Bolsonaro, but that's the trend, that no one will form a coalition with Flavio Bolsonaro. The Brazilian electorate grew by 1.4% compared to 2022 and reached 158.7 million according to the Superior Electoral Court. Correct, the northern region saw the largest proportional increase at 4%. Here, this is the growth in the number of voters. Look, from 2010 to 2026, every 4 years, you can see that the growth rate of voters used to be higher. So now it's slowed down a bit, it's still growing, but the growth of the electorate has slowed down. Altogether, there are 158.7 million Brazilians eligible to vote in the 2026 elections, according to data released by the Superior Electoral Court. The number represents an increase of 1.46% compared to the last elections, when the country had 156.4 million. That's 2.2 million more voters compared to the last election, right? There was an increase in voters in all regions except the Southeast. The Southeast saw a decrease. What explains this phenomenon? A few things explain it, right? There may be some factors causing this. One of them is a reduction in migration, since São Paulo has always been a place that attracted a lot of people from outside to work. But now there are other ways of working, like telework, remote work, the famous home office. Companies are setting up outside the big urban centers, especially outside São Paulo. So jobs are being created in the Northeast, in the South, and in the Midwest. You have agribusiness generating a lot of jobs in the Midwest, so this reduces the flow of people coming to the Southeast, so this causes a decrease. There are even people going back, right? The people working from home are having a great time, going back home and still working for a company in São Paulo, or even an international one. So that explains a bit of this phenomenon of the number of voters decreasing in the Southeast, but increasing in all the other regions. In the Northeast, there was significant growth anyway. So we have the numbers. Now, out of those 158 million, you can figure that about 110 million actually vote, leave their homes and go vote. About 48 million won't even leave their homes to vote, and then there are those people who cast blank or null votes. That's why valid votes are calculated excluding those people, and the result is usually much higher than the poll results, which don't show blank or null votes. This is the last poll right before the election, right? Look at this interesting news. Searches for Sicário surge after a photo with Flavio Bolsonaro. So, folks, a bunch of people started to believe that Sicário was the man's name, the hitman, right? This guy here. Sicário is not a name, guys. Sicário is a profession, a very dishonorable profession, a hired killer. Sicário meaning, I'll show you, look, Sicário is a term that refers to a hired assassin, a hitman or an individual who commits crimes with extreme cruelty. The word comes from the Latin sicarius, which derives from sica, a small dagger used by assassins in ancient Rome. Okay? So Sicário means a hired assassin. Sicário is a killer. It's that hitman, Daniel Vorcaro's hitman, who was at a barbecue with Flavio Bolsonaro. Flavio was shirtless, just chilling, relaxed and all. Then he says, he's saying the photo is AI generated, but it's already been proven by forensics. The photo was examined before being published, and it's not AI generated, it's real. He claims it's AI generated because he can't admit that he was at a barbecue with Vorcaro's hitman, with Vorcaro's hired killer. A hired killer is not the first one who has been around Flavio Bolsonaro. Let's remember Adriano da Nóbrega, who was honored by Flavio Bolsonaro. From inside prison, Adriano da Nóbrega was in jail, and Flavio Bolsonaro honored the hired killer, the head of the crime office in Rio de Janeiro, and employed relatives of the hired killer in his own office. So it wouldn't be the first hired killer who shows up kind of turning up around Flavio Bolsonaro, right? And what about the Dark Horse financial report? Well, that's a good question. Find out what Flavio Bolsonaro's campaign decided. You don't know. I'll tell you. Flavio Bolsonaro decided that he will not disclose the film's finances. Yes, why? Because they think that if they disclose the finances, then it's really going to stink. That's when their opposition, right, which in this case is the progressive side, will take this financial report, check it item by item, cent by cent, and will cause trouble for Flavio. Because they'll say, look, there's an irregularity here, there's another one here, this is above market price, this was overbilled. So to prevent that from happening, Flavio Bolsonaro decided that he prefers to take the heat for not releasing the campaign finance report rather than take the heat that releasing them would cause. Because it's probably full of shady stuff, otherwise he wouldn't be afraid to submit the campaign finance report. So he decided, no, I'm not going to submit the campaign finance report, right? I'm not going to. I'm going to pretend I'm dead. That's it. The campaign is pretending to be dead so they don't have to present the financial report for Dark Horse, the famous and popular Dark Nag, Jair Bolsonaro's movie, which tells the story of Jair Bolsonaro. So we won't have the financial report. Mario Frias promised, no, the financial report will be here on Monday. It's been 2 months and they just stare into space, whistling and acting like it's not their problem. And they'll keep doing it. And of course, the left, the PT, Lula's campaign will exploit this like crazy, and they should, because that's a weak spot. He thinks that Flavio, who isn't really such a weak spot, because according to him, it's private money for private money. He hides the fact that there's public money involved there, right, from Daniel Alvacar's own money. There's money from retirees in Rio de Janeiro and Amapá, from city halls and other state governments all over Brazil. So yes, there is public money, but he pretends there isn't. And by pretending there isn't, he thinks people will forget. But we won't forget, Flavio. We will keep demanding an accounting for the movie Pangaria de Treves, the famous Dark Horse.